Every tinned tomato product you buy contains hidden chemicals leaching from the metal can lining directly into your food. That innocent-looking tin of chopped tomatoes from Tesco, Sainsbury's, or even premium Italian brands contains BPA, epoxy resins, and endocrine-disrupting compounds that migrate into acidic tomatoes at alarming rates. The food industry knows tomatoes are highly acidic and cause maximum chemical leaching, yet they continue using the same toxic can linings because they are cheap. Here are 7 tinned tomato brands hiding chemicals in every can. What you discover will change how you cook. Number 7. Tesco Everyday Value Chopped Tomatoes. You walk down the tinned tomato aisle at Tesco and reach for Everyday Value Chopped Tomatoes because they cost around 35 to 40 pence per 400-gram tin. That price seems like an excellent value until you understand what you are actually buying and what chemicals are hiding inside that metal container sitting on the shelf. First, let us talk about the tomatoes themselves and where they actually come from. Tesco Everyday Value chopped tomatoes are sourced from multiple countries, often including China, and processed using the cheapest possible industrial methods. The label will say something vague like product of more than one country, or list multiple origins without specifying percentages or giving you any meaningful information. This means Tesco is buying tomato paste and concentrate from wherever offers the lowest price at any given time, regardless of quality, growing conditions, or safety standards. Chinese tomato production is a particular concern because China is the world's largest tomato paste producer, and their tomatoes are often grown in conditions that would not meet UK or EU standards if they were trying to sell fresh tomatoes. Heavy use of pesticides, questionable water sources for irrigation, and large-scale industrial processing all contribute to lower quality tomatoes, ending up in these budget tins that you feed to your family. But the tomatoes are only part of the problem. The bigger issue is what Tesco adds to these tomatoes and what leaches into them from the metal can. Turn over that tin and read the ingredients list carefully. You will see chopped tomatoes, tomato juice, and then citric acid listed as E330. Citric acid is added for 2 reasons. First, it acts as a preservative to extend shelf life. Second, and more importantly, it masks the poor quality of the tomatoes by adding sharp acidity that makes them taste more like premium tomatoes. Here is what they do not tell you on the label. The metal can itself is lined with epoxy resin that contains BPA or BPA alternatives, which are often just as concerning. Tomatoes are highly acidic foods with a pH around 4.3 to 4.9. This acidity causes the can lining to break down faster than it would with neutral or alkaline foods. The BPA and other chemicals in the can lining migrate directly into your tomatoes, especially if the tin has been sitting in a warehouse or on a shelf for months. Research has shown that tinned tomato products contain some of the highest levels of BPA contamination among all tinned foods. A study published in Environmental Health Perspectives found that people who consumed tinned tomato products regularly had significantly higher urinary BPA levels than those who avoided tinned tomatoes. The acidity of tomatoes accelerates the leaching process, meaning you're getting a concentrated dose of endocrine-disrupting chemicals with every spoonful of pasta sauce you make. Tesco knows this. The food industry knows this, but they continue using BPA-lined cans because they are cheap to manufacture and have a long shelf life. Switching to glass jars or BPA-free alternatives would increase costs, which would cut into their profit margins on budget products. Tesco Everyday Value tomatoes contain hidden chemicals and questionable sourcing, but the next budget supermarket brand has additional concerning additives. Number 6. Asda Smart Price Chopped Tomatoes. Asda Smart Price Chopped Tomatoes follow a similar pattern to Tesco's budget offering, priced around 35 to 45 pence per 400-gram tin, but Asda's version includes an additional chemical additive that reveals even more about the quality of the tomatoes they are using. Look at the ingredients list on Asda Smart Price chopped tomatoes, and you will often find calcium chloride listed as E509. Calcium chloride is a firming agent added to tinned tomatoes to prevent them from turning into complete mush during the canning and sterilization process. This tells you immediately that Asda is using lower quality tomatoes that would otherwise break down completely during processing. Premium quality tomatoes with proper ripeness and firm flesh do not need calcium chloride to maintain texture. They naturally hold their shape during canning. Budget tomatoes are often overripe, damaged, or grown specifically for processing rather than fresh consumption. These tomatoes have softer flesh that falls apart easily, so manufacturers add calcium chloride to artificially firm them up and create the appearance of better quality. Calcium chloride itself is generally recognized as safe at the levels used in food processing, but its Its presence tells you something important about the product. You are not buying good quality tomatoes that were carefully grown and harvested at peak ripeness. You are buying whatever cheap tomatoes Asda could source from international suppliers, chemically treated to hide their poor quality. The BPA issue applies equally to Asda Smart Price tomatoes as it does to Tesco. The metal cans are lined with epoxy resin containing BPA or BPA alternatives. The highly acidic tomato juice sitting in these cans for months before you buy them is steadily absorbing chemicals from the can lining. Every time you just open a tin of Asda Smart Price tomatoes, you are introducing endocrine disrupting compounds into your cooking. Here is something even more concerning. Budget tin tomatoes like Asda Smart Price often sit in warehouses and on supermarket shelves far longer than premium products because they have a slower turnover. A premium brand might sell within weeks of being manufactured, but budget products can sit for months or even approach their use-by dates before being purchased. The longer tomatoes sit in contact with the BPA-lined can, the more chemical migration occurs. Temperature also matters. If these tins have been stored in warm warehouses during the summer months, the heat accelerates chemical leaching. BPA migration increases significantly at higher temperatures, meaning you could be getting substantially higher contamination levels, depending on storage conditions you have no way of knowing about. Asda, like Tesco, prioritizes low prices over food safety and quality. They source the cheapest possible tomatoes, add chemicals to mask quality issues, package them in BPA-lined cans, and sell them to you at prices that seem like bargains but actually represent false economy when you factor in chemical contamination and nutritional compromise. Asda Smart Price tomatoes use firming agents to hide poor quality, but the next supermarket brand has excessive salt and sugar additions. Number 5. Sainsbury's Basics Chopped Tomatoes. Sainsbury's Basics range, now rebranded as Stamford Street in some stores, includes chopped tomatoes priced similarly to Tesco and Asda offerings. But if you read the nutritional information panel carefully, you will notice something concerning. The sodium content is significantly higher than it needs to be, and there is detectable sugar content despite tomatoes being naturally low in sugar. Manufacturers add salt to tinned tomatoes for two reasons. First, salt acts as a cheap preservative that extends shelf life. Second, salt masks the metallic taste that develops when acidic tomatoes sit in metal cans absorbing chemicals from the lining. The more chemical contamination occurs, the more the tomatoes develop an unpleasant metallic flavor. Adding salt helps cover this up. Some Sainsbury's Basics chopped tomatoes contain around 0.3 to 0.4 grams of salt per 100 grams of product. This might not sound like much, but when you use an entire 400-gram tin in a pasta sauce, you are adding 1.2 to 1.6 grams of salt before you add any additional seasoning. For people watching their sodium intake for blood pressure or heart health, this hidden salt is a significant concern. The added sugar is even more insidious. Tomatoes naturally contain some sugar, but quality ripe tomatoes have enough natural sweetness that no additional sugar is needed. When you see added sugar on the ingredients list, it tells you the manufacturer is using underripe or poor quality tomatoes that lack natural sweetness. They add sugar to compensate and make the product taste more like proper ripe tomatoes. This added sugar also serves another purpose. It masks the slightly bitter chemical taste that develops from BPA and other compounds leaching from the can lining into acidic tomatoes. The combination of added salt and sugar creates a flavor profile that hides multiple quality and contamination issues. The BPA contamination issue applies to all Sainsbury's tinned tomatoes just as it does to other supermarket brands. The metal cans are lined with epoxy resin containing BPA. The acidic tomatoes leach this BPA into the food you eat. Sainsbury's could switch to glass jars or BPA-free alternatives, but they choose not to because it would increase costs and reduce profit margins on budget products. Here's what makes Sainsbury's approach particularly problematic. They market their Basics range as simple, no-frills products that give you basic ingredients without unnecessary additions. But the reality is these products contain added salt, added sugar, added citric acid, and absorb BPA from can linings. There is nothing simple or basic about that. You are getting a highly processed product with multiple additives and chemical contaminants. Sainsbury's Basics tomatoes hide excessive salt and sugar, but the next premium Italian brand proves that expensive does not mean chemical-free. Number 4. Napolina chopped tomatoes. You reach for Napolina chopped tomatoes because they are an established Italian brand with heritage and premium positioning. You pay significantly more than supermarket budget brands, expecting genuinely better quality and fewer chemicals. Unfortunately, while Napolina tomatoes are indeed made from Italian tomatoes and taste better than budget brands, they still come in BPA-lined metal cans that contaminate your food with endocrine-disrupting chemicals. Napolina is owned by Prince's Group, a major UK food manufacturer, and while their tomatoes are grown and processed in Italy, the canning technology and materials they use are standard industrial food packaging. The cans are lined with epoxy resin containing BPA or BPA alternatives. Despite the premium price point and Italian heritage, you are still getting chemical migration from can to tomatoes. This is particularly frustrating because you are paying premium prices, expecting premium quality and safety, but the fundamental packaging problem remains unchanged. Napolina could switch to glass jars like some of their competitors, but they maintain metal can packaging because it is cheaper to manufacture, lighter to transport, and has a longer shelf life. The tomatoes themselves in Napolina products are genuinely better quality than budget supermarket brands. They are grown in specific Italian regions, harvested at proper ripeness, and processed quickly to preserve flavor and nutrients. But all these quality advantages are compromised when the tomatoes are packed into BPA-lined metal cans where they sit for months absorbing endocrine-disrupting chemicals. BPA mimics estrogen in the human body and interferes with hormone function. It has been linked to reproductive problems, developmental issues in children, increased cancer risk, heart disease, diabetes, and obesity. The European Food Safety Authority and the UK Food Standards Agency have acknowledged concerns about BPA exposure, particularly in vulnerable populations like pregnant women, infants, and young children. Yet here you are buying premium Italian tomatoes packed in containers lined with this problematic chemical, feeding them to your family in pasta sauces, pizzas, and casseroles, completely unaware that the packaging is contaminating the food. Napolina does offer some products in glass jars, but its core chopped tomato range predominantly comes in metal cans. This suggests they know glass is a better option, but choose not to make it the standard because of cost considerations. They are prioritizing profit margins over consumer health, even while charging premium prices. Napolina premium tomatoes still come in BPA-lined cans, but the next Italian brand has additional concerns about acidic leaching from metal. Number 3. Cirio chopped tomatoes. Cirio is another premium Italian tomato brand widely available in UK supermarkets. Like Napolina, Cirio tomatoes are genuinely sourced from Italy and processed to higher standards than budget brands. Also like Napolina, they predominantly package their chopped tomatoes in metal cans with all the associated chemical contamination issues. But Cirio illustrates an additional problem with tinned tomatoes that goes beyond just BPA. The acidity of tomatoes causes them to react with the metal can itself, not just the lining. Even when cans are properly lined with epoxy resin, microscopic imperfections in the lining allow acidic tomato juice to come into direct contact with the underlying metal, typically tin-plated steel or aluminum. This direct contact causes metal ions to leach into the tomatoes. You are consuming trace amounts of tin, iron, and other metals every time you eat tinned tomatoes. While these metals are not as acutely harmful as BPA, tin can accumulate in the body and cause digestive problems, headaches, and other symptoms. The longer tomatoes sit in metal cans, the more metal leaching occurs. Premium brands like Cirio often have better quality control and faster turnover than budget brands, which reduces but does not eliminate this problem. You are still consuming metals from the can with every serving. Cirio has made some moves toward better packaging. They offer certain products in glass jars and have introduced Tetra Pak cartons for some tomato products, but their core chopped tomato range remains predominantly in metal cans. This is purely a business decision based on manufacturing costs and established distribution infrastructure. Glass jars cost more to manufacture, are heavier to transport, and are more prone to breakage during shipping and handling. Tetra Pak cartons require different packaging equipment and have their own environmental and potential contamination concerns. Metal cans remain the cheapest option for manufacturers, so they continue using them despite knowing about chemical and metal leaching issues. You buying premium Italian brands like Cirio expect better quality and safety. You get better tomatoes, but you still get chemical contamination from packaging. This is the fundamental deception in the tinned tomato market. Quality differences between brands exist, but every single metal can tomato product exposes you to BPA and metal contamination. Number 2. Product of Italy. Fraud. Walk down the tinned tomato aisle and you will see numerous brands prominently displaying Italian flags, Italian language, images of the Italian countryside, and claims of Italian origin. You assume you are buying tomatoes grown in Italy by Italian farmers. In many cases, you are actually buying Chinese tomato concentrate that was shipped to Italy, minimally processed, and repackaged to qualify for product of Italy labeling. As long as the final significant processing and packaging occur in Italy, the product can be labeled product of Italy even if the tomatoes themselves were grown in China. This loophole allows manufacturers to exploit consumer preference for Italian tomatoes while using cheap Chinese tomato paste. China is the world's largest tomato paste producer, accounting for approximately 35 to 40% of global production. Chinese tomato paste is extremely cheap because of low labor costs, large-scale industrial farming, and minimal environmental or safety regulations. This paste gets exported in bulk to Italy, where it is diluted with water, canned or jarred, and labeled as Italian. The Italian tomato industry has been complaining about this fraud for years, but regulators have failed to close the loophole. Genuine Italian tomato farmers cannot compete with cheap Chinese concentrate relabeled as Italian. This drives down quality across the market and deceives consumers who specifically seek Italian tomatoes for their superior flavor and quality. Here's how to spot this fraud. Look for phrases like product of Italy versus Italian tomatoes, or grown in Italy. Product of Italy only means packaged in Italy. If the label specifically states the tomatoes were grown or cultivated in Italy, that is more reliable. Also, look at the price. Genuine Italian tomatoes from Italian farms cannot be sold for budget supermarket prices. If you see supposed Italian tomatoes for 40 to 50 pence per tin, they are almost certainly Chinese concentrate. Some brands are completely transparent about this. They will state tomatoes from more than one country processed in Italy, which at least tells you honestly what you are getting. But many brands deliberately use Italian imagery and language to imply Italian origin, while technically only saying product of Italy, which has a completely different meaning. This matters for multiple reasons. First, you are paying premium prices for what you believe are premium Italian tomatoes, but actually getting cheap Chinese concentrate. Second, Chinese tomato farming often involves heavy pesticide use and water from questionable sources. Third, the tomatoes are processed into concentrate using high heat that destroys much of the fresh tomato flavor. Fourth, you are supporting fraudulent labeling practices that harm honest Italian farmers. Number 1. BPA can linings across all major brands. This is the number one issue that affects virtually every tinned tomato product you buy from UK supermarkets, regardless of brand, price point, or marketing quality claims. Whether you buy budget Tesco, premium Napolina, or supposed Italian specialty brands, if the tomatoes come in a metal can, you are almost certainly getting BPA or equally concerning BPA alternatives leaching from the can lining directly into your food with every meal you prepare. BPA, or bisphenol A, is an industrial chemical used extensively in epoxy resins that line the inside of food and drink cans. It has been used in can manufacturing since the 1960s because it creates an effective barrier between food and metal, preventing corrosion and extending shelf life substantially. But BPA is also an endocrine disrupting chemical that mimics estrogen in the human body and interferes with normal hormone function in ways that scientists are still discovering. Decades of research have linked BPA exposure to numerous serious health problems. It affects reproductive development, especially in fetuses, infants, and young children who are most vulnerable to hormonal disruption. It has been associated with increased risk of breast cancer, prostate cancer, diabetes, obesity, heart disease, behavioral problems in children, and thyroid dysfunction. The evidence is strong enough that many countries have banned BPA in baby bottles and infant formula containers, acknowledging it poses particular risks to developing children whose hormonal systems are still forming. Yet BPA-lined cans remain standard for adult food products, including tinned tomatoes, despite clear evidence that BPA migrates from can linings into food at measurable levels. And we absorb it every time we eat tinned foods without even realizing the contamination is occurring. The food industry argues that exposure levels are below regulatory limits and therefore safe, but many independent scientists and health advocates dispute these limits as inadequate and outdated, given newer research. Tomatoes are particularly problematic for BPA contamination because of their high acidity levels. The pH of tomatoes ranges from 4.3 to 4.9, making them one of the most acidic common foods you regularly consume from cans. This acidity breaks down the epoxy resin lining faster and causes more BPA to migrate into the food compared to neutral or alkaline foods in identical cans. Multiple studies have measured BPA levels in tinned tomato products and consistently found them to be among the highest of all tinned foods available. A study in the Journal of Exposure Science and Environmental Epidemiology found that eating just one serving of tinned tomato soup resulted in measurably increased urinary BPA levels within hours of consumption. The food industry's response to growing BPA concerns has been to develop BPA alternatives for can linings. You might see some cans labeled BPA-free and assume they are safer. Manufacturers simply switch to similar chemicals that are not yet as well studied or regulated, allowing them to market products as BPA-free while still using problematic can linings. Here is what the food industry does not want you to know. Glass jar packaging and Tetra Pak cartons do not have these chemical leaching issues. Tomatoes in glass jars have no contact with BPA or metal. Tomatoes in Tetra Pak cartons are separated from packaging materials by food-grade barriers that do not leach endocrine disruptors. Mutti, an Italian brand available in UK supermarkets, packages many of their tomato products in glass. Some organic brands also use glass, but these remain niche products with higher prices. The vast majority of tinned tomatoes sold in the UK come in BPA-lined metal cans because the industry prioritizes profit over health. You might think you can avoid this by choosing fresh tomatoes instead, and you would be partially right. Fresh tomatoes have no BPA contamination, but fresh tomatoes also have limitations. They are seasonal, expensive outside of season, variable in quality, and require more. Preparation time. Many recipes specifically call for tinned tomatoes because they provide consistent quality and concentrated tomato flavor. The solution is not to avoid tomatoes. The solution is to demand better packaging. Buy tomatoes in glass jars when available. Choose Tetra Pak cartons as an alternative to cans. Support brands that have eliminated BPA-lined cans from their product lines. Write to supermarkets and manufacturers demanding BPA-free packaging. Vote with your purchasing power. The food industry will only change when consumer demand forces it to change. As long as you keep buying BPA-lined tinned tomatoes without complaint, manufacturers have no incentive to invest in safer packaging alternatives. But if enough consumers switch to glass jars and make it clear they are avoiding metal cans because of BPA concerns, the industry will respond. BPA-lined cans contaminate every major tinned tomato brand with endocrine disrupting chemicals regardless of tomato quality, or BPA-lined cans contaminate every major tinned tomato brand with endocrine disrupting chemicals regardless of tomato quality or price point. So what should you do? Stop buying tinned tomatoes in metal cans completely. Switch to glass jar alternatives like Mutti or organic brands that package in glass. These cost more, but you are paying for genuinely safer packaging that does not leach chemicals into your food. Consider Tetra Pak cartons as another alternative to metal cans. Look for products specifically labeled BPA-free packaging and verify they use glass or alternative materials, not just BPA substitute chemicals. Use fresh tomatoes when practical, especially during summer when they are in season, affordable, and of high quality. Make your own tomato sauce in batches and freeze it in glass containers for later use. Most importantly, demand better from food manufacturers and supermarkets. Contact them directly. Tell them you refuse to buy BPA-lined products. Support brands that have already made the switch to safer packaging. The only way to force industry change is through consumer pressure backed by purchasing decisions that hit their profits,